Yes, I'm Batman.
I'm Batman. I'm Batman, Alfred.
I'm Batman.
I am Batman!
I'm Batman.
I'm Batman.
Greetings and welcome back to Holy BatCast, brought to you by Real Fans for Real Movies. Please visit our website, holybatcast.com. It's where you're going to find episodes of this show, as well as videos, links, all kinds of good stuff. You can also find us all over the internet on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Just search for Holy BatCast and you'll find us. And if you're a big fan of the show, would like to support the show, you can do that through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/holybatcast. And a huge thank you to all our patrons who do make sure that this show keeps running. We couldn't do it without you. You guys are awesome. We are part of the Real Fans podcast network that includes Real Fans for Real Movies, or RF4RM. We've got Taking the Bullet, where Roman and Leroy watch bad movies so you don't have to. We've also got Disorder, every Disney film. So you can check out all those shows at rf4rm.com or just search for them by name. As always, I'm your host, Andy DiGenova. Hi. And if you'd like to follow me when I'm not talking about Batman, you can follow me on Twitter or on Instagram just by searching my name, Andy DiGenova. Now, on this episode, we are going to be doing a bit of the past, present, future, maybe, of DC films. Maybe that's a good way of putting it, and talk about some other assorted DC news and things. And joining me to do that, I do not have Jamie Drewley. He is ill, so please send him get well soon messages on Twitter. But fortunately, I have another fine gentleman who took some time out of his evening to talk about this stuff with me. And I'm sure you know him. I'm sure you're familiar with his writing and his commentary on all things nerd. And that is from Forbes and from Superhero News and from YouTube and all the different things that he plays in. Mr. Mark Hughes. Hey, Mark.
Hey, thanks for having me back on the show, Andy.
Hey, welcome back. It's been far too long. And there have been listeners who've been asking, like, when are you going to have Mark back? So I'm glad we made this work.
Thank you for the support from all of the listeners that have asked that. First of all, I really appreciate it. And again, I always have a good time, so I look forward to the discussion today.
Well, I appreciate that. And I don't want to brag, but this show has the best listeners in the world.
Yeah.
In the entire world. Every other podcast wishes its listeners was as cool as Holy BatCast listeners. Anyway, no, it is good to have you back again. Wish it could be more regular, but you're a busy guy. I'm a busy guy. What can you do? But recently on Forbes, you wrote a couple articles around DC, and we can't get enough of that DC talk. And I want to talk comics first, then we'll talk movies. Two of the loves of our life.
Yes.
But you just had this great exclusive article about Bendis and his new involvement with DC Comics. So can you give us a quick overview? What's Brian Michael Bendis doing at DC?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I was really excited when they first approached me about it, and it's a terrific interview, by the way. If you haven't read it, I recommend, not only because I want you to read my articles, but also because Brian Michael Bendis is such a great person, and his enthusiasm for all of this. And I'm not just saying this to promote it. I mean, honestly, he's so enthusiastic about what he's doing, and you can hear it in his voice. And very often you talk to a creative artist who's working on these things, and sometimes they are burned out, and sometimes they're just kind of they're going along and they're into it, but they don't necessarily have that kind of joy and excitement like they're going on a new adventure. And he has that, and it's very obvious speaking to him how enthusiastic and excited he is. And part of that is because the deal he has with DC Comics now is a kind of partnership that is very rare, and actually the specifics of this deal just haven't existed before in the medium, where he's going to have all of his creator-owned content all of it is going to be moved and hosted by DC. They're going to reprint his stuff, and then they're going to keep the series running as well, with new content coming out. And it will all be hosted and promoted and pushed and part of, within the DC library, not part of the DC shared universe of characters, of course, but all of it will be, it won't just be a separate little publishing entity where they let creators do stuff, but then they don't really put time or effort or money into promoting it or treating it like it's their own. Even though it's his creator content, DC is going to aggressively promote it and make sure everyone is aware of it, just like they do with any of their titles. And then they're handing him, of course, he's going to have a new imprint, which you'll be hearing about soon. I know some about it that I'm exceedingly enthusiastic about this, and when people find out, they're going to be really thrilled about what's going on in it. But he has a new imprint that he'll be curating as well, and he'll be doing work in, and then also curating work that other people are bringing in and doing within it. It'll involve some new characters. It will also involve some classic, famous DC characters will be involved and be getting stories in that as well. And then, of course, the main, the thing that is the headliner, I guess, for a lot of people, for a lot of DC fans, although any of this is really kind of headline information, he will be taking over Superman, both the Superman monthly title and Action Comics monthly title. And he'll be doing both of those. And before that, leading up to it, he has a Man of Steel miniseries coming out that is not rebooting. It is, all of this will pick up where the ongoing series have left off. So he's not erasing the work or the stories or the events that have happened. He's picking it up, and then he's introducing a whole new set of really big things that are happening and big changes involving a big Kryptonian villain, and all of it tying back into Superman's origin. And it's going to really fundamentally alter Superman's life going forward. And what I'm excited about in particular is that the Superman Monthly is going to be the straightforward superhero action, bam, smash kind of, what you want and expect from a big superhero action-driven monthly title. And then separately, he's going to have Action Comics focus more on Clark Kent's character and his life and the life of the city of Metropolis itself, and really letting Metropolis become like a major background character in every story, and that the whole point of it is to explore life in Metropolis and how life is affected in the city by Superman and all of the things that Superman brings to that city with his presence. So it's a lot of work, and unfortunately, it does mean that Bendis will probably die of exhaustion in a couple of years.
I gotta tell you, as I was reading it, I had the same thought. Some of these guys are machines, and I was just like reading all of these plans he has, which are really exciting and awesome, and honestly got me really excited about restarting Superman. I'm choosy on my comics, and I pretty much stick to the Bat books, but just hearing his enthusiasm for Superman and what he has in store, I was like, oh, damn it, I'm gonna have to start buying Superman. It's a good problem to have, but
we already spend too much money on comics every month, don't we? So
exactly, right? Like, all I need you to do is hook me into a new one, or two in this case. But still, like, I was like, man, he's got these really great, ambitious plans, but it sounds exhausting. God bless him. I hope he's got the stamina. But you said at the beginning, like, his enthusiasm really impressed you, and just from words on a screen, I could read it when I read your article. I was like, wow, like he seems really, really psyched to be taking on this new challenge and getting to write a character. It sounds like he's loved his whole life. So I thought that was really, really cool.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, he's doing all of this, and then he's going to be working with some of the famous luminaries of DC and of comic book history. And in particular, I assume everybody, I assume, noticed and saw that besides all of those things I mentioned, I forgot to mention he's also doing a story in he's doing 10 pages along with Jim Lee is doing the art for Action Comics number 1000, which will be the introduction of any of Bendis's writing. He's doing like the first 10 pages of that issue, and other writers, a lot of writers are working on it. But then there's a comic called DC Nation number 0, and he is doing a story in that. And he's doing it with Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. And Garcia Lopez is, of course, one of the all-time great, not just one of the all-time great comic book artists, but he is also one of the artists who created a very definitive, long-lived kind of look and style for DC. And when you think about DC Comics and what it looks like, so much of that was shaped by Garcia Lopez's work. And you can't, anytime you go into, for any listeners who aren't familiar with him, which if you are not familiar with him, use the thing called Google, look it up, and then you'll immediately realize you've probably seen his art your entire life. But if you've ever bought a toy or merchandise from DC or T-shirts or things, there's a solid chance that the artwork on the boxes or on the cardboard or whatever that came with that merchandise included his renderings of the DC characters, because that's how famous his drawings and his artwork are. And it's really fantastic stuff. So he was in not full retirement, but he was semi-retired, and he came out of that that semi-retirement status just to do this, especially with Bendis. So it's going to be really, really terrific. I can't wait to see. There's just so many people. I mean, Bendis's work alone is worth getting these comics for. And like, we were just saying, it's going to add a lot more. It's going to add more money to our monthly expenditures for comics, but it'll certainly be worth it. And then to see him working with the icons of DC Comics over the past many decades and some of the great recent and current, artists, it's really an exciting time. I mean, there's so much going on at DC Comics right now that it's hard not to find a lot to love.
Oh yeah, they are. They're really just cranking away at trying to, really do exciting new stuff. And this is a great example of that. As you were talking, I had to Google image search Jose Luis Garcia Lopez, because I had heard the name, but it wasn't one that like I immediately knew who that was. I was like, oh yeah, that sounds familiar. And I Googled it and I was like, oh yeah, this. Like probably the most classic iterations of the Justice League characters that I can imagine. Like these were like my coloring books when I was a kid.
Yes.
Was these these drawings, and I still have shirts that have these versions of the characters. That's amazing. So like the superpower style was like him.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it's great. While you were saying that, I realized I gave that advice about I am very familiar with his work, and I don't mean that to sound condescending, but but after saying that, I thought, well, and you said you had Googled it, and I thought, well, I wonder. I said that, but hopefully it does come up when you Google it, because I just assumed that it immediately would. So as you were saying it, I looked, and sure enough, there it is. It's all the stuff that you'd immediately want someone to see if they've never seen his work before. It's like, well, here you go. It's it's classic, great stuff.
Yeah, I was like, oh, duh, this is the best. I love it. So yeah, good stuff there. But yeah, so obviously getting the short version of everything that Bendis is doing does not replace checking out the article. Mark is nice enough to come in and talk about this stuff. So go to Forbes.com, search for Mark Hughes, and it's like the second or third article down. It's because it's just a couple days old.
Yeah, you can go to Google and just put my name in Forbes, and it'll pull up the link to my main page. And then, of course, if you go to Forbes and Google or Forbes and search for me on the main page, it'll pull up links to my articles as well. So.
Yeah. So make sure you do that to hear all of Bendis's big plans for Superman. Like I said, it's pretty awesome, and I love that you made it a point that he's building on what came before. It's not a reboot. It's not starting over. It's just taking what the hand he's been given and doing his own thing with it, which is pretty exciting to see what kind of ideas he has to bring to it. And I also love the idea of doing the Superman book in one way and the Action Comics in another, having a different angle for each to really make them feel unique, which, a lot of the Bat books have done very well. And so I think that's pretty great as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's true that the Batman comics have taken, and I buy a lot of monthly comics, more than I probably should be buying every month, but I have Marvel Unlimited, which is the monthly service. And I know this is heresy to say on a DC-oriented show, but I pay the monthly like $10, and then you get access to everything, Marvel's entire digital library, basically. Everything's there up until a certain point. So I do that with Marvel, and then for DC, I buy DC in actual physical comics, and I buy a lot of the titles that are going. I think I buy I'd cut down to 3 or 4 a month for a while, and that didn't last long. So I'm back up to 5 or 6 a month, and then I also, any new series that come out I get as well. And Batman has typically, and I love, and I don't mean this at all as a knock against any of the Batman writers, because I think they're fantastic and I love them. And especially, I mean, there's just Scott Snyder's run on Batman is one of the all-time greatest Batman runs, in my opinion, that's ever been done. But the Batman comics generally, they all have, the writers each have their own flavor, but I've never felt like the individual titles necessarily, like the main ones, like Batman and Detective Comics, I've never felt that they each took a very specific tonal and storytelling approach to try to make them both about something significantly different. Like one's about Batman and one's about Bruce. And what I mean is, in the past, I never felt like that had been a thing for Superman. Forgive me for a moment for my lack of clarity, but I'm going on very little sleep because I slept about 3 hours last night. So the Batman comics have very well, going back and forth between them, they've managed to not do a dramatic difference in those things. Like, one is just about Bruce, one's about Batman, but they still have had Detective Comics has an identity, and the Batman Monthly has an identity. And I feel like they have, at any point that I'm picking up one or the other, I know which title I'm reading, if that makes any sense.
Right.
And they didn't do it I don't think that they did it in the way that Bendis is doing here, where he's specifically like, I'm going to really approach an entirely different aspect of the character's life, where one is about more Superman, one's about Clark Kent, one is about action driven, one is character and environment driven and focused on the world and the city around him. Batman, I don't know that they've really ever had a period where that was exactly what was the difference between them, but they still managed, as you said, very well to have a different flavor and a different kind of tonal approach, even though looking and picking them up, you might not, as a casual reader, notice offhand. If you just read one issue of one and one issue of another, you might feel like, oh, it's Batman, but it's, there's a lot of nuanced ways they get at that, and I like that Superman has found a new way to do that. So it's they're literally not even going to be telling the exact same stories or even same kind of stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great approach, and I'm excited to see how it pans out. So it's exciting times, and the fact that it's starting so soon with Action Comics number 1000, it's a great time to be a Superman fan as well, or a Bendis fan. And if you're both, well, Merry Christmas, everybody.
The old Man of Steel Burns run, by the way. When it's a lot of people don't like it nowadays, and there was a period of time when it was really just kind of like it was the general fan consensus for some reason to dislike the Burns run. But I loved John Burns reimagining and his reboot of the Superman books and the work that he did, and there was so much world building that went on, and in a lot of ways I feel like he took Superman back to the more traditional origins, which I liked a lot. And that sounds to me like Bendis has not the exact same approach in mind, but the same sentiment about going back and looking at Superman's origins and saying, what new stories are there to tell that really take us back and derive from who Superman is formatively and what Superman represents that was there foundationally in that character from the start, and that has carried through the ages. And I really, really appreciate that a lot.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and that's the plan for this new villain. That's all. Like that's the clue he gave us, right? Was that it's a new villain. It ties into Superman's origins, and that's all I can give you.
Yes, he let us know there's a villain. It's a Kryptonian villain, and it will be someone that the whole thing harkens back to Superman's origins on Krypton, and it's going to be really it's going to it's going to have a huge impact on Superman's life and on the Superman comics, and is going to change the status quo in Superman comics forever. So when it happens, and I raised this point with him with regard to the Superman's origins and the idea of taking it back there, because over the years, Superman's kind of become this messianic figure, and a lot of the focus of Superman's mythology and what it means and what it represents, typically, for the past many decades, most writers have preferred to kind of zero in on the Jesus Messiah kind of New Testament similarities and metaphor. And I've always found the original, the Old Testament, the Torah basis for Superman at his conception to be a lot more interesting and compelling. But some of that and what that means for the character has kind of gets lost on and off throughout the ages when the focus is too messianic. And so I like the idea of going back and taking us to the start and finding a way to reconnect with those origins and those roots for the character.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. So yeah, guys, check this out. I'd like to move forward. Let's talk a little bit of movies, because you also wrote an article. It was a bit of just kind of looking back, and this is something that I know there's been a lot of desire for, is just kind of looking back at, shall we call it, phase one of the DC films? Maybe
Yes.
That's the appropriate way to call it, because starting with Man of Steel and then through Justice League, obviously lots of ups and downs for fans throughout these last few years. It's been not quite 5, right? It'll be 5 years in June.
Yeah.
So that's crazy. Man of Steel's already almost 5 years old, which is nuts. But yeah, so you wrote this article about basically what happened, why did Zack Snyder's take on Batman and Superman, specifically Batman versus Superman, maybe not connect with a lot of people? What might have, I don't want to say gone wrong, but as far as like connecting with the greatest audience possible, what didn't connect? Because for those of us who like it, we didn't feel it went wrong, but
Right.
Obviously everything that happened after shows that it could have gone better. I guess we can put it that way. But yeah, I mean, if you want to, I guess like we can start by looking back and just saying, hey, what was this approach, and why do we think it didn't, work for everybody? And then what does that mean now moving forward? So a little bit of, again, past, present, future. But yeah, if you just want to give us the crux of what you think didn't connect with people about Zack Snyder's take on these classic characters.
Sure. I think the two things that really hampered that were the biggest negative influences on the DCEU previously. One of them, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's finger pointing. It's kind of pointless, no pun intended. But and I did a big article that was like, here's what really went on with Zack Snyder's history as a filmmaker in the DCEU, and the fact that that with the first Man of Steel, he didn't write it, he didn't develop the story. He came aboard and was a director for hire sort of for that film, and even though there was a lot of talk about, and he clearly really influenced the design and a lot of things about that movie, it was the creation of the creative team who developed and brought to life the Dark Knight trilogy. And because of that, Warner Brothers wasn't going to allow anyone to come in and tinker with it too much. And Snyder has said that the one concession he got, he really made his case strenuously and got, and talked to Christopher Nolan about it and convinced Christopher Nolan to let him have Superman kill Zod at the end, which I did not have a problem with at all personally. I know a lot of people did, and I respect that.
I didn't either. I respected what he was, what story he was trying to tell by having that happen in the film. So It didn't bother me.
Yeah. So if that's the concession that he got, then it's obvious that, to me, that he didn't have a lot of initial full creative control from start to finish on that project, in other words. And the idea had been originally to make a Superman series that would exist on its own, just like Batman. It wasn't going to be a DCEU. It morphed and evolved during production. Easter eggs got put in case, like, hey, we're going to put these in, it'll be fun. Maybe nothing will come of it, maybe it won't. But by the time production was done, Warner had pretty clearly decided we're going to use this to start a DC shared universe. So that film and the intentions behind it really underwent a lot of change, and a lot of that was because of not the producers or the artists making the film, but because of increasing studio expectations and demands. And then, of course, we all know Batman ended up, instead of doing a direct sequel, which was what everyone involved wanted to happen initially, there was a feeling that it underperformed. Man of Steel underperformed slightly by, $100 to $200 million below what they had hoped it would do. So, okay, well, what are we going to do to boost that? Well, as soon as Batman's name came up, that was it. He wasn't coming off the table. As Zack Snyder said, once that name is said, you can't take it off the table again. And that was a movie where, that and now I'm doing what I said I wouldn't do and going into the detail. But basically, from Man of Steel, then Batman v Superman, when Snyder was expected and supposed to have, now he's going to have the full creative control. A series of different things happened and people came aboard and whatnot, that it didn't end up being entirely him running the show anyway. And then he made the movie, though. It was his vision. And then there were repeated demands to edit it down, and we all know the result. If you've seen the ultimate cut, you know that even if you like the theatrical version, which I did, I walked out thinking that was great. Then I see the ultimate cut, and now I can't even watch the theatrical version, knowing how much of Superman's story was butchered out of the movie. So, and then Justice League, because of Batman v Superman, all of the plans were changed. Everything, at that point, Snyder was not having full creative control or story control anymore. He was very obviously, and I'm just going to tell you, anyone who was not in the room when I went and did a set visit when they were filming Justice League, and I've interviewed Zack a few times on the record and for Forbes, and I interviewed him before the release of Batman v Superman, and I saw his enthusiasm. And he thought what they were going to build was going to be unlike anything anyone expected or had ever seen in the superhero genre before. And his excitement and happiness during that junket, and then visiting the set and seeing his disappointment when the discussion turned to the rejection among the mainstream public and critics and a lot of fans toward Batman v Superman, it was really difficult for him, and it was really painful for him, and he was so sad. And when he talked about it, the extent to which it depressed him that people didn't like what he had done and that he wasn't going to get to do the big 2-film overarching, the plans were all changed significantly, obviously, on the front end. So we never really... Zack Snyder and the DCEU, we only got a portion of a Zack Snyder DCEU anyway. And what we got was there were so many things that got in the way and so many things that happened that changed everything, and so much executive meddling and stepping in. And I know that there's people that'll take offense at that, but it's just the truth. A lot of these choices were made by executives who frequently were very reactionary. And as soon as there was something, oh no, we got it, like it or not, whether it would have turned out differently, who can say? I don't know if the ultimate cut and a few other changes would have to that film, or Justice League being a big 2-part, 5-hour to 6-hour, overarching 2-part movie the way Zach and Deborah had intended I don't know if it would have done any better or not, but in retrospect, Justice League made $655 million. Could Snyder's full version, if he'd actually been able to make it, could it have performed lower than that? I don't think so. I think it would have performed at least the same, if not better. I know people will think I'm crazy for saying it. That's just how I feel. So looking back, I would say it was Snyder never really got to develop his full vision in the first place. And all of those changes and that sense of constant turmoil had an effect on the public perception, because even mainstream people who weren't keeping tabs on it, you hear reports, and the media coverage tended to have a skeptical tone to it overall. There was quite a lot of skepticism in the media. So any awareness the mainstream public did have was filtered through a lot of "I'm not sure about this" kind of tone in a lot of the media coverage, and then the bad reviews and everything else. And then separately, completely valid that some people, the handling of Superman was, I think, central, and his relationship with Batman, but especially Superman, I think, was central to how the public reacted to these movies and why a lot of fans weren't happy and a lot of critics weren't happy with it. You're not wrong if you prefer the Christopher Reeve Superman, or if I love Christopher Reeve Superman. It's my favorite Superman, honestly. Mm-hmm. So if that's what you wanted, and instead you have a movie that's a deconstruction of Superman, which deconstruction doesn't mean, most people think it just means tearing a thing apart, and it's not. Deconstruction is dismantling it to understand how it works and then putting it back together again in a way with an understanding of what made it work, and in a way that might make it work better or differently than before, but to still maintain the essence of the thing. So the deconstruction was not a destruction of it, but a lot of people don't get that. And deconstruction is, Snyder and loves the deconstruction of superhero and the superhero genre, not just the characters, but the cinematic genre, which these films very much did. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people didn't want that. And, if people don't want it, I remember clearly speaking with, when we were all there on the set, and Deborah Snyder said, we realized people didn't want that. There's only so much deconstruction that people want, and they didn't want that deconstruction. We thought it was the interesting approach, and that we would be able to, after the deconstruction, you rebuild, and it's something new and bigger and stronger. But people didn't want that journey. They didn't want that particular path. They wanted a different one, and it's not neither path is superior. It's just different, and expectations were different. And it's unfortunate, in my opinion, and I think a lot of it was caused by misunderstanding, and a lot of it was caused by some of that meddling that cut portions out and removed things and changed things in ways that made what we did get of that vision and that deconstruction somewhat less organic and smooth than it was intended to be. Right.
And I think that's really the main point here is that attempt at deconstruction of Superman and Batman. Your point is very valid, is that, Snyder came onto Man of Steel and it wasn't really his vision. He of course had a part in it once he came on board, but it wasn't his show at that point. Batman vs. Superman is probably the closest we got to his show, but even that, as you point out, once Ben Affleck came on board and brought Chris Terrio on board, things changed, things shifted, not to mention whatever else might have been happening behind the scenes with Warner Brothers or whoever else. So Batman vs. Superman is probably the most consistent as far as it being what Zack Snyder wanted to make, but I think there were even concessions there. And then, of course, we know Justice League did not end up the way Zack Snyder envisioned. So he never truly got his movie from beginning to end. But if you look at Batman versus Superman, that is where he was shooting for the stars. And that's part of what I love so much about it, is how ambitious it was. And I totally understood where he was coming from, as far as being Batman and Superman now have been around a really long time. There have been a lot of different versions that the public has seen of both Batman and Superman. And so they are characters that are ripe for deconstruction at this point, because they've just spent the last 75 years being constructed. And I think that's where he was coming from. But people weren't there yet, especially with these versions. And I think that was probably the miscalculation on his part. It's always been my criticism of the film, and it's not my criticism of the film itself, but it's my criticism of jumping to the film, of, we didn't get, I'm sure in his mind, we just got 3 movies of Batman, and so now people are probably ready for a Batman they've never seen before. But I think people were like, no. I need to get to know this Batman first before you give me the Batman that's been pushed too far over the edge. Like, I need that. I need to know Ben Affleck Batman as Batman before I see him getting pushed too far, getting pushed into the darkness, losing track of his mission, and getting too far into the dark side of things, which is what Batman vs. Superman is all about. Zach, I think, thought, oh, people will make that jump with me. And then a lot of people wouldn't. And I think that was a miscalculation. And the same thing with Superman. Man of Steel is Superman Begins, and I love it. But then it jumps a year and a half into the future where now Superman is having a crisis of faith. And I think people would have been more forgiving, or not forgiving, but they would have been more willing to go with that crisis of faith if they had seen Superman, if they had seen the new status quo of Superman in between Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman.
Yeah, I do believe that I think it would have really been helpful to have had a Superman movie in between them, where in the aftermath of the events of Man of Steel, we could have had Superman confronting a non-alien type threat, and maybe had a little bit more of a different introduction to Lex Luthor, and given audiences, I think audiences didn't have quite enough chance to fully buy into this Superman, because the first movie, he doesn't become Superman like in costume and the world sees him and it's, oh, there's Superman, until a good ways into the movie, and then it's all just the extended climax of the movie basically at that point.
Yeah.
And so he's a character that in the first movie, the world doesn't know who he is and the world is unsure of him, which was the whole point, was how would the world react, and addressing that concept of the xenophobia and the fear and all of those themes, which I think are great and were very valid and necessary, to address in a Superman movie for some of the relevance of the character. But it went from that into a second movie that took a huge further, multiple leaps forward with that darker global rejection of Superman's role. I think it would have been helpful to have a movie where he comes into the role and feels more comfortable as Superman. And in that movie, we see that there are some people who feel he's heroic. People are, there's people who like him. There's people who are still unsure of him. And the things he's doing, they're becoming increasingly fearful of his power. And for other reasons, not just what if he's evil, but for those underlying, the reasons that Lex Luthor, for example, hates him because, well, if there's a God walking among us, nothing we do is ever going to be good enough or matter anymore. What's the point of we've developed a manned mission to Mars and we're going to send, astronauts to Mars and we're going to build the spaceship. It'll take well, Superman went there for lunch.
Right.
It kind of undermines the meaning of human. So there's a lot of people who would feel that way. I don't feel that way, but and I think the opportunity to show the world kind of becoming divided, and then even people who support Superman starting to realize, like, this guy can do anything. What are the implications of that? That would lead into Batman v Superman, then, where we would have a basis of having accepted Henry as Superman, and this is our new Superman, and the world is, we've had chance to see him have fun in the role and be uplifting, but also how even an uplifting, powerful, heroic figure, the world, as much as the world loves to see somebody rise, the world loves to see him fall as well. And that would bring an extra element into it, I think. So Batman v Superman, when the world starts to really turn against him and starts to say, wait a minute, and and there's that huge backlash, I think it would have helped to have a movie in between there. I really do.
Exactly. It's all the stuff that they pay lip service to in Batman vs. Superman about, every time your hero saves a cat out of a tree, you write a fluff piece. And, they built him a statue, and Perry White says something about, love affair with Superman dead, or that's not the exact line. What
Yes.
love affair with Man of Steel dead, something like that. So like they imply, oh yeah, all that stuff happened. All that Superman that that you've known for 75 years, or I guess now it's what 80, 85. I've lost track. But like, oh yeah, all that stuff happened. But you know that we're getting to this other thing, and so it's like I think he wanted people to go, oh okay, yeah, sure, I'll jump to this other thing, but I just don't think people were quite there.
Yeah.
And I think that worked against it. And I think that was true on both sides, because I think people are okay with the deconstruction, but there was less time with the construction to begin with. And I think that was where there was a disconnect.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think going into the point and the concept was, things are going to things have to get worse before they get better, and things are going to hit rock bottom. And with, Batman versus Superman will end with, it's going to be the movie that's full of all this angst. And then Justice League is going to be the path out of, the end of Batman v Superman will open the door to the path out of the darkness into the light, so to speak. But it kind of starts us off right at the basement level in the darkness without having us go to that level. And I think the fall from grace would have had more impact and been more resonant with mainstream audiences if there had been the extra beat in between Man of Steel and Batman v Superman to let us get to the height, so that the fall, it's a bigger fall and you hit harder. The higher, so the higher you go, then the harder the ground is when you come down. And I think that would have really added to what was going on in Batman v Superman, and I think people would have appreciated it more. And then because contrary, there are people who insist that Batman v Superman is bad storytelling or bad filmmaking, and I'm sorry, I don't agree with that, and I don't think there's a very good case to be made. The complaints that I see about it tend to be individual aspects or elements. And none of it seems to be like a really unified point arguing against the quality of the storytelling or the quality of the filmmaking per se. It's like, well, I wouldn't want it all tends to come back to it was deconstruction without construction, as you put it quite eloquently just a moment ago. That really is ultimately what all of it boils down to, I think. So, and then I do think there's the story choice of going for the death of Superman, which does, again, without the movie in between, feels even more like we just got this guy and he's dead already.
Yeah,
and then he's dead and we get him right back again. It's like that's really kind of moved fast through two major story points and moments within the DCEU that should have been earth-shattering, epic moments in the DCEU, and both of them kind of got stepped on a little bit because it happened in such a, the distance of time between Superman dying and Superman coming back to life cinematically is, how long is it? An hour and 5 minutes, an hour and 10 minutes. It's like that happened. It's he had his origin movie, and then the end of the second movie he's dead, and then about 2/3 of the way through the third movie he's back alive again. So, and I understand why, even though I liked all of these movies, I understand there were reasons, and that a lot of people it didn't connect with, and there are reasons that a lot of people have complaints about those things in the films.
Well, and I think that is it. It's like, we're two guys who really liked all these films. So, but at the same time, like you kind of put your head in the headspace of the people who didn't and try to understand it. Like for people who are like, oh, it's a crap movie, I don't buy that. I'm like, no, it's not a crap movie. They made specific choices that you might not have been on board for, but that doesn't mean it's a crap movie. It just means that is not how you like, your Batman and Superman. That's you didn't want it to go where it went, and so be it. But that's kind of what I liked about it was I always applaud the risks taken and the bold strokes of specifically what Zack Snyder always has done. Like I don't think he knows how to play it safe. I think even if you asked him to, he wouldn't be able to do it. He's just a guy who likes to push the envelope. He likes to take big swings, and that's why I like him as a filmmaker.
He doesn't have a lot of sacred cows. He loves these movies and he loves these characters, just like he loves video games and this other stuff. But then you look at films like, Sucker Punch, I think is highly underrated, highly misunderstood. I think a lot of the complaints about that movie completely miss and what's happening and completely misstate what's actually going on in the movie and in the way that it's filmed even. And it's because, when I watch his movies, it's like there's however much he loves Batman and Superman and comic books, however much he loves this genre and the films, he is not afraid to say, you know what, I love these things, but everybody's making them everybody's making great superhero movies within the genre and even mixing genre and so on. He's interested in taking these things apart, seeing what makes them tick and making us question, like Watchmen, making us question a lot of foundational assumptions we make about superhero cinema. I mean, if you watch Watchmen and you take its messages seriously and you take them to heart, you'd never watch a superhero movie again in theory, or you would have to really reconsider how you watch a superhero movie. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you just hit on something really, really meaningful, is that, especially now in the world we're living in, where a new superhero movie comes out every 2 to 3 months, it's such a flooded marketplace. You have to imagine that he's like, well, everyone's making superhero movies. I can't just make another one. Mine has to be different. It has to be unique. It has to stand out. And he had his ideas of how to do that. And it worked for some and it didn't work for others. But I think that probably also was part of the approach he took of like, well, yeah, everybody's making superhero movies, so here's something that's going to set mine apart.
Yeah, I agree. It's sad to me when people miss, huge relevant points like that. It makes me sad that a filmmaker who cares so much and who, I know a lot of filmmakers who, when they hear that people didn't like something they did, they're just like, screw them. Or they just get angry, or they don't care, and they're like, I don't, it's, so what if people, there's some fans who didn't like it or whatever. So what? Zack Snyder, when he finds out, if you're walking down the street and you say, I didn't like your movie, he's gonna stop and he's gonna be bothered and he's gonna say, why? What didn't you like? That's because that's how he reacts and that's what he thinks about it.
He's like me. He's sensitive.
Yeah, he
when I get that one negative iTunes review, I'm like, I can't shake it for a week.
I think it speaks to the fact that this stuff, it does matter to him, and it's difficult, I suppose, to be, and we all know, we all experience some form of this in our lives at some point, I'm sure. When you care about something and you're really doing your best at something, and you feel like you've done something special and meaningful that you think people are going to love, and then people are just like, huh? Or they're like, nah, I don't really like that. It's how disheartening that can be. And when, the more you care about and put your heart into your work, and the more it's a reflection, as this is, I think, of someone's love of whether it's a genre or a medium or the concepts and the ideas at the heart of the stories. When you put yourself out there that much and it's that reflective of yourself, then those criticisms of the art increasingly feel like it's a criticism of that. In some way, it's a criticism of you and of your heart. Really, I get that. I understand how that feels, and so I understand why he reacts the way he does. But I don't know how anyone. It's funny, it's funny because I feel like I've watched a lot of the way people have reacted to Zack Snyder and a lot of the hyperbole about him. And I'll say this, I also think that fans need to not overstate the animosity toward the films and not overstate it all as being just, oh, everyone just doesn't understand. Oh, everyone just hates Zack Snyder personally. I think there's a lot of hyper-personalization of this stuff, and there's a lot of anger and resentment that makes a lot of people overreact, and they don't understand that, it's easy to forget. Most of the people that were critical of this movie or had mixed reactions are just ordinary people. They don't know Zack Snyder's name. They're just an ordinary person who went to the cinema that weekend. They'd heard of this movie. They went and saw it. They weren't reading anything online about it. They didn't read any reviews. They only see 3 or 4 movies a year, like most ticket buyers in this country, and just they see a few movies. They walked in. They decided, oh yeah, this is that Batman movie. Let's see this. They saw it and they walked out and were like, I just, it wasn't really my thing. And it's not because they hate Zack Snyder. It's not because they're stupid and don't know what real art is or anything like that. It just didn't connect with them for whatever reason. And we all experience that. If you don't like Marvel movies, or if you don't like the movies that are nominated for Best Picture, or if the one that won Best Picture, you were like, why was it even nominated? Then you know what it feels like to see art that everyone else or a lot of people might like and love, but that just doesn't speak to you and doesn't touch you. So, it's important not to overstate this as if there's some like major crucifixion campaign going on against Zack Snyder, but also it's worth not just saying, well, there's a lot of fans who exaggerate it and a lot of people who get rude online, so I don't even care, and I'm just going to deny there's anything. I think there was a lot of exaggeration in the negativity toward the film, and I think there was a lot more negativity and skepticism from the outset way early on than it really deserved. And I think there was a lot of personalization of the complaints within the press, certainly, and within some fandom, certainly, towards Zack Snyder. And I think he was one of the people that was kind of scapegoated on this in order to save jobs of other people higher up, or, however impolitic it is to say that. That's the reality. And I don't think it's even a shocking or amazing or absurd thing to say. We all know that's how it works, I don't know if you have profanity on your show, but shit rolls downhill. That's what happened here when, people that were, and that happened. And unfortunately, I think Zach really got kind of blamed for everything and thrown under the bus on this in a lot of ways. And I don't think it's fair, and I think it's very unfortunate. I think another casualty who didn't deserve it was Jeff Johns, and I'm still with DC, and I'm hoping that once things have calmed down, and then I'm hoping that he's going to be back to having a stronger role in all of this. And meanwhile, of course, he's working on Titans, and he's doing work with in comics, so he's got a lot going on. But I do hope that his ideas and sensibilities are allowed to come back in and have a stronger influence on the future of the DCEU. I don't know if that'll happen. I hope it does.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. And to kind of take it, to start pushing towards the future by still looking back, we talked about Man of Steel, we talked about Batman versus Superman, and then leading into Justice League, that I guess we'll focus on those 3 because you had Suicide Squad in there and you had Wonder Woman, and those had their own unique set of circumstances. But if you want to take, we'll call it the Zack Snyder trilogy, even though how much of each one is his is of course up for debate. But if you think about it, no matter what your feelings on the films are, if you saw Man of Steel and you were one of those people that went, that's not Superman doesn't snap necks, whatever, Jonathan Kent, Jonathan Kent should have all the answers. What drives me crazy about that scene is it was such an easy fix for him to just say, of course not, but you have to be careful. That's all he had to say. It was the easiest fix in the world. It drives me nuts. Anyway,
I tease about that a lot, and I laugh about it because I do think that's one of the biggest problems in that film is, I like it a lot more now than I did previously when I saw it. It's the more as I watch it, I like it. The things that I like about it, I like more, and the things that bother me, like Jonathan Kent telling him to drown busloads of kids, is which is an exaggeration for humor purposes.
I know.
Yeah, it's all those things, they bother me less, but I still it's still rough to watch sometimes when he's like, the choices you make are going to determine the kind of man you're going to be, and that man, he's going to change the world. It's like, you just told him to let everybody die. Why did you? No, Clark, you got to let me die. Dad, you're 25 feet away. I can run, and I don't even have to use superpowers. I can literally run normal, grab you, hold on to you as the tornado passes, and then nobody will see us, and we'll just tell them, oh, we just got lucky.
I know.
And when Superman says, I let my father die, it's like, you should never say the line, I let my father die, Clark. I know they wanted him to, it was important. They wanted the idea that Jonathan Kent sacrificed himself because he believed so strongly in it, and they wanted Clark to respect his father's wishes and to understand it and trust his father so much that he was willing to let his father make that sacrifice for him. I get the concept, but it was one of the things that I think a lot of people probably had difficulties with. If you're seeing that and then later Superman kills Zod, it's like, well, his dad did tell him to kill, let people die in order to save his secret, and he did watch his dad die, and now he's killing Zod. Cumulatively, I think it creates a lot of disconnect between our expectations and our idealism for that character. That's a total tangent. Sorry for
No, it's okay. It's what happens. That's what happens when you bring up little things like that in Man of Steel. And I hear you. I totally understood what they were going for with the death of Jonathan Kent. I just think it needed a rewrite to smooth it out, to make more sense. Because the same thing, I was like, you can go get him. You can go get him. Like, there's not a good reason to not go get him.
What are you doing?
They had to find a better way to put him in a no-win situation.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, my point is, if you're one of those people that saw Man of Steel, like again, I still love Man of Steel. I have the little nitpicks, but I still love it.
Me too. I love it, but I like it a lot. I like it a lot. I won't say I love it, but I like it a lot, despite the fact that I'm willing to kind of poke fun here and there.
But if you're one of those people who saw it and you did not like it for whatever reason, that movie already caused a lot of animosity from the fans who did not like that portrayal of Superman. And that became about Zack Snyder, rightfully or not. Like, that was who the fans pinned it on, who didn't like it. They were like, oh, it's Zack Snyder. It's him. And then Batman vs. Superman comes out. And if you already were not on board with Man of Steel, and now you got Batman vs. Superman, it already has that baggage that it's dealing with. But there's enough of like new added value with Superman and Wonder Woman that people still were like, okay, well, you know what? I'll give it another shot. And now it's a further deconstruction of Superman, way more like makes Man of Steel look like a damn birthday party. And then add the deconstruction of Batman on top of that, as well as a very different version of Lex Luthor than what you might be expecting. And so like it's already being pushed outside of your comfort zone. So if you're coming in not liking Man of Steel, and then you try it, you're like, oh, I'll give him another shot, Batman versus Superman, and it's even more different than what you already wanted. Now you're doubly angry, and again, you're blaming Zack Snyder. So at that point, like, there was nothing you could do to get those people on board for Justice League. And I think they tried, I mean, it's very obvious that when you see the final film of Justice League, if they were like, well, then we're going to give you the versions of the characters that you wanted all along. Like, that's what we'll do. If that's what we're hearing from you, that's what we're going to give you. And I feel like those people were already lost. You weren't going to win them back over. But then instead what you did was the people who had been with you for Man of Steel and with you for Batman versus Superman, they alienated a big chunk of them, which is, I think, where Justice League became this no-win scenario of like, you couldn't win back the haters, but by changing it, maybe course correcting it a little too much. And again, I love Justice League, so F me, but by course correcting it to the point where like now the people who loved Batman versus Superman are like, well, this is not what I loved. This is not what I signed up for, which is, I think that's where they kind of got it from both sides when it came to Justice League, which led us to the predicament we're in right now, which is, kind of unsure of how to proceed. But you brought something up earlier and I can't remember, I can't remember what I think it was when you're talking about like the reaction to Man of Steel. That's what it was. You were talking about the reaction to Man of Steel and how instead of just going forward with a sequel, they decided, no, let's make it a shared universe. We're bringing in Batman, we're bringing in Wonder Woman, and let's correct what people didn't like about Man of Steel. So Man of Steel disappointed a lot of people. Batman vs. Superman tried to correct those sins. Batman vs. Superman disappointed a lot of people. Justice League tried to correct those sins. And like, it's really hard to have a strong, confident march forward if every movie is a course correction.
Yes, exactly. And especially because when you're constantly course correcting, your focus is not on storytelling or characterization.
Right.
It's not on world building. You're treating it, and I'm going to say this, then I'm going to slightly contradict myself, but you're treating it first and foremost as a commodity. And saying you're treating it as like, and I get why. It is a commodity, and it is an IP, and it is a brand that's being developed for exploitation through merchandising and other revenue streams. There's all of these buzzwords and stuff that is completely true, and it's a business. That's all Hollywood is a business. It's not an art gallery where they tell artists, come in, we have free canvas and free paint and you can do anything you want. That's not what it is, and it never was. And there was never some golden age when all it was just a giant artist commune in Hollywood where everyone came in and they gave them free billions of dollars to make anything they wanted. That never happened, and it never will happen. It's a business, and these are expensive, valuable IP. So I get why people in suits who don't collect comics and who don't buy toys, who all they do is spend most of their day doing math, I get why people at the top that are looking at this and at the end of the day say, we have a company to run, and if we don't maximize the profits and the revenue stream for some of our most valuable properties, the people who invest in our company and who run our company and make these decisions are going to put all of our heads on spikes out in front of the company, and then they're going to just sell if they're going to find somebody who will exploit these things the proper way and make the most money out of them, or they'll sell them off like furniture. So I understand that a lot of these decisions get made by people who aren't into it the way we are, and who do look at it as the bottom line is the bottom line for them. But at the same time, I think that they don't understand that that's a really fast way to kill these things and to actually devalue them and to create a downward spiral where you lose value in the IP and you lose revenue streams because you lose quality, because you're losing touch with what made these things popular and big IP in the first place, which was people loving them because they relate to them, and people relate to them because of the stories. So when your first concern is constantly, they keep saying course correction, but very often it wasn't a course correction. It felt like somebody was sticking their foot out off the side of the bike, dragging it behind them, to throwing everything off, and people were jumping on and off back and forth, and it was just throwing the balance off. Instead of stopping, if they really wanted to course correct, they would have stopped and said, just because we have a date set to begin production on Justice League, we aren't going to necessarily do that. Let's wait and see what happens. BVS, Batman versus Superman, it underperformed clearly, but it didn't underperform in a disastrous way either. It's it's the third highest grossing DC movie in history, right? So, and it underperformed. It underperformed, but the extent of its underperformance, realistically, I think, my theory, and I wrote about this when I did my review, and I first wrote an article talking about what the box office potential was. I expected it to do better, but I said I think the window of the ceiling versus the floor for this thing, if it gets bad reviews and it doesn't get a cinema score, an audience grade in the A range, an A or A minus, if it gets in the B plus or B range, and if it gets mostly negative reviews, then it's probably going to top out at $900 million. And that's right around, I thought I figured it, I thought it was so good and so cinematically powerful and so different. I thought people would be like, yeah. And I thought it would end up with an A minus cinema, or I thought it would end up with at least in the range of Man of Steel or slightly better, in the 50 to 60 percentile range on Rotten Tomatoes. And I thought if it did that it would hit in the 1 billion plus range. How high, just depended. But I thought it could do that. I didn't expect the reviews to be as bad as they were, and I didn't expect the cinema score to be a little bit lower. But those things affect legs, and that's it. I mean, that was really that second weekend drop off was the difference between where it finished and topping 900 million. And if it had topped 900 million, a lot of these conversations would be very different right now.
Right.
A lot different than they are. If it had hit in the 900 to 950 million range, it would have been seen as this was another underperformance, but we don't need a major correction. This is almost where we want it. We got really close. We just need to turn the dial a little bit. And I think it would have been a different conversation. As it was, once it went under 900 million, that was definitely the range where, okay, now there's definitely, it's underperformed and we can't deny it. And there's no putting lipstick on the pig. It's good, but good isn't what it should have been. It's just Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and you also mentioned like course correcting constantly is not the way to build a brand or to build trust. And I think that is I think one of the biggest issues that now these films have faced, and the future films, and I think Justice League paid for that, and I think the future films will continue to pay for that, in that now people are just more leery of this cinematic universe. Not all, some of us are completely on board. I mean, but there are a lot who aren't, and to the point where like Wonder Woman was tracking pretty soft and a month out. And I think it was because of that. It was because of people being like, well, like we're 3 movies into DC and I haven't liked any of them. So why is Wonder Woman going to be different? And Wonder Woman, I think, had to work twice as hard to then overcome that. And fortunately, the movie was good enough that it was able to, which was amazing. But like it was tracking soft, and the conversation didn't change until those first reactions came out. And because prior to that, even then, there was still a lot of like, yeah, you know what, fool me 3 times, forget it. And and it like it only was able to become the phenomenon it did was because, thank God, the movie was as good as it was, and that word of mouth made all the difference. And it had that, that A cinema score, and it had the reviews, and so people were like, okay, well, I may not have liked Batman versus Superman, but apparently Wonder Woman is good, and it was able to overcome that. But I feel like now the DC films are, at least in the moment, are having to fight that. Justice League, again, I think was really good, but I don't think it was good enough to shake off that hangover. And then, knowing that, there were visible flaws with the film, it still gave ammunition for those people who didn't want to like it. So it wasn't good enough to overcome that reputation the way Wonder Woman was.
Yeah, Wonder Woman benefited from, it was such a fantastic movie. It was just so great. And I know there are people out there who try to diminish, or I shouldn't say try to diminish. That's not fair. A lot of people do try to diminish it, I think, and have kind of a reactionary take on it. But a lot of people that just, for whatever reason didn't like it and think, oh, well, it wasn't that special, but it was. And I think, I think people should temper that reaction with understanding. If you didn't like Wonder Woman, I get it. I don't get it. I don't get why you didn't. I'm not going to lie. Okay. I almost lied to you. If you don't like it, that's fine. But the notion that it was not good filmmaking and was not that it's overhyped or that it's overestimated, or that the importance of that film is overestimated is, I think, pretty hard to back up with any serious argument. Even though, sure, there are people who say, oh, well, that third act, it was just a CGI fight fest. Have you seen a superhero movie before?
Right.
There's a lot that weren't, but there's a lot of them that are. And if you always dislike that, okay, but then that's not because Wonder Woman was an inferior product or had an inferior third act. It's because you don't like that thing that is very common in these kinds of movies in the first place. Mm-hmm. So whatever. But yeah, I think that movie, it benefited. It was just so fantastic. And then secondly, I want to highlight and point something out about Wonder Woman. The PR for Wonder Woman is actually nominated for an award by the publicists, and I don't know if the guild is the proper term for it, but there's a guild and there's an organization that represents publicists and a lot of other people, and the publicity team for Wonder Woman is actually nominated for an award for the best publicity team for the work that they did on Wonder Woman. And I saw firsthand behind the scenes what they did, and it was phenomenal. And a lot of stuff that people don't really maybe fully appreciate, like the fact that they went ahead and they allowed social media reactions earlier than expected for the movie, and they trusted and there was like, look, after the difficulties that the films have had and the DCEU has had to date, because at that point it had been 3 misses, and it had been, well, Superman got majority positive reviews, but a lot of those positive reviews were mixed, and then it was still, at Rotten Tomatoes, it was a rotten score because it didn't hit 60%. And then, of course, Batman v Superman and Suicide Squad both were a disaster critically, and audiences gave both of those films in the B range. So there was nervousness at the studio with Wonder Woman, but the publicity team was convinced they had a great product and they wanted to sell it, and they wanted to be confident about that film, and really put together some great PR for it and some great outreach to journalism and to the media for it. And they had that, they went ahead and said, we're going to drop the social media embargo early. And that went great for them because the buzz was tremendously positive. And then second, they said, I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Then second, they said, and then the reviews, of course, ended up coming out a little bit earlier than expected as well. But then another really crucial part, how often do you see a marketing campaign that puts the certified fresh on everything? Mm-hmm. And it got the certified fresh, and boom, it was on posters, it was on advertisements, it was on the ads online. You saw that heavily, and they knew the importance, and that when audiences see it, audiences don't usually, Rotten Tomatoes, most people don't read the reviews. They, the people, they look at it and they see, how
they see the percentage and go, oh, okay, that's it.
Yeah, and if 9 out of 10 people are telling you this is a good movie and you should see it, and then the blurb, the summation that they put up there of what's the all around consensus is that it's a great frickin' movie. Okay, well, 9 out of 10 critics said it's to go see it, and they, the consensus was it's great. Boom, that's going to matter to people. People know what that certified fresh means, and so that the publicity around the movie really, in those last couple of weeks, and especially those last 10 days, boosted it enormously, and the buzz took off, and it became a must-see kind of event status film. A lot of like what's happening with Black Panther right now for Marvel, and Wonder Woman became the DC movie that reached across the aisle, and that even Marvel fans and fans who generally prefer Marvel movies and didn't like all the other DC movies to date loved Wonder Woman, and said, this, if you guys want your DC movies to be great and for everybody to love them and for them to be successful, look at Wonder Woman and look at what they did for Wonder Woman, and do that with all your movies, and you'll have hits every time. So it did that. And I think Black Panther, an aside, I think Black Panther will be the DC movie, the Marvel movie that most appeals to DC fans and wins them over and makes them say, okay, yeah, Marvel movies, if the Marvel movies are all like this one, I'll show up every time.
Yeah, and that's great. That's how it should be. So going from Wonder Woman and then Justice League, where are we now, and then what's to come? The good news is it seems like, despite the bumps in the road, that DC movies are not ceasing to move forward, which is great. It seems like, they continue moving forward. Obviously Aquaman, they have to move forward because it was already made, but you're not seeing things go quiet, which I think is a good sign already. Shazam just went into production, another really good sign. And because of that gap between Justice League and Aquaman, as fans, we're like, oh, it's too long. The gap is too long. But I think it could be a blessing in disguise, because it does allow Warner Brothers to take stock and to instead of trying to change the wheels on while the car's in motion, the way they did with Justice League, they can set things up for success in the future by taking stock at what worked, what didn't, not be afraid to slow down and really focus on what's important in getting quality things in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that I'm not gonna lie. On the one hand, I want to be optimistic about the future, and they're certainly bringing talented people in, but I also feel like they've lost some talented people, or they've maybe pushed aside or diminished the role, so to speak, and we'll see how that all plays out. But again, I'm really disappointed that Jeff Johns, that they didn't just say, let's turn DC Films into its own studio, give it an annual budget, and equivalent to Marvel Studios is a standalone one, and then let Jeff Johns, put him in charge and tell him, build a brain trust of creative talents to help pick and decide and put teams together around each of these franchises. I really think that would have been the smart way to go, but they didn't do it, so that's fine. Okay.
I'm with you. Like we said earlier, Jeff Johns was the unfortunate casualty of people trying to save their jobs. But we also still don't know how that's going to pan out, because in theory, officially, nothing has really changed with his role. We have to see how that actually happens in practice.
Right, and I think one thing to remember is it's been a long time since we had any. It's been a long time since we've actually had a movie released. Have we had a movie released? Think about this. Have we had a movie released that was actually standalone, fully 100% the product of a creative, the entire, here's the leadership, here's the creative team, and this is what they're doing and what their plan is and their development for the DCEU. Have we had that really?
No.
Maybe you could say that with does any one film represent a true, here is a representation of this leadership and their plan and how to do this? It keeps changing. Nolan was supposedly going to be, he was going to be a godfather for the DC, new DC franchises. Boom. No, he godfathered one movie, and then he godfathered his butt out of there and said, I see ya. I got other things to do since you're not going to do what we talked about doing. And then Batman v Superman came along, but then, of course, there was a lot of studio interference on that. And then everything afterwards has been reacting and adjusting and changing leadership. It's been over and over.
Yeah.
So even with Aquaman, it's going to be a couple of years before we see a film that represents the current leadership that's just been brought in. Are they going to survive in time to have their movie? Every time there's a change of leadership, the new leadership ends up having some sort of influence over and altering what was coming and what films are in the pipeline and are developed. So it's really hard to say that we've really seen a unified vision and a leadership of the DCEU so far. And I don't mean that as a slight against Diane Nelson, who I think is awesome, and or Jeff Johns or the Snyders or anybody. It's just that there's a lot of executive decision making and a lot of changing and constantly adjusting people's roles and what's expected and the level of autonomy or the lack thereof for DC Films and the people involved in it. So I think at some point you can't let each and every film be itself a yardstick and a lightning rod that either everything has to go exactly as planned or you're going to keep, and it comes back again, to you can't be in perpetual course correction. If if what you're doing is zigzagging all the time, you're never going to go in a straight line. And they need to get set in a straight line. And sometimes you take some lumps, what happened in the Marvel's early days? Iron Man came out, huge hit. The Hulk came out and it flopped. And no, we don't talk about that much, but the Hulk was a flop. And Marvel didn't even break stride. They said, these movies are all a piece of something bigger than themselves. We want each of them to be as good as possible, but the failure of any one film is not a failure of the whole thing. The structure is sound. The plan is sound. We can continue. If we need to correct something or say, hey, that didn't work as well, it's in relation to that individual film, but we're not going to change everything, and we're not going to fire people and change the whole leadership. I understand sometimes you have to fire people if stuff's going wrong and if people are actually bad at leadership. For example, and this is really rough, but if you've got leadership high enough up that keeps sticking their fingers in the pie and multiple projects and high value IP keep stumbling because you keep having people sticking their feet out in front of the people that are trying to run the things at the down the ladder, then that's where you need to start questioning some leadership decisions. Yes, but I really I hope for the future of the DCEU. I think it has promise. I think there are certainly ways to continue forward without rebooting it. I do think that it would be worth starting over, and I know that's an unpopular opinion and a lot of people hate it, but
Well, I understand the rationale, even though I don't want them to. I don't want them to because I've liked what I've gotten, and I like this Superman, and I like this Wonder Woman, and I like this Batman, and I love this Flash. So I don't want them to reboot. But it's also hard to argue the logic because it goes back to what I said earlier about trust. Is these films have lost so much trust with the general audience? Is that
right?
Is it past the point of no return?
And I think that's really I think what's crucial to understand is that I don't think it's past the point of no return in a long-term larger sense, but I think if you keep making movies that are clearly overtly weird, and I don't mean it. I think sometimes you have to do that. I think sometimes if you have a plan in place and you're doing it and you're like, we have a plan, we're going to see it through, then you take some lumps and you keep going. But at this point, I don't think DC actually has, I don't think they were allowed to develop a plan. And I think anyone who says, well, we do have a plan now, and that plan is what was put in place and hasn't been allowed to develop yet, but it's going to, Aquaman is coming, and going forward, we put a plan in place and we're not going to let Justice League disrupt it. Well, I'd buy that if you didn't just change the entire, if you didn't just change leadership. But they did.
Right.
So clearly they can't claim entirely that now we're just having faith in the plan and we're going to keep moving forward. Sujihara is stepping back and going to have a less direct role in day-to-day oversight of the film division. Emmerich moved up and into a different position. Berg is gone, and Johns has been moved aside, or not moved aside. Johns has been supposedly is going to be is going to be more advisory and is not going to be as directly hands-on with the movies anymore. I think he's going to be, obviously he's going to stay involved directly in TV stuff, and I'm so excited for Titans, by the way. We could do a whole show talking about that.
Oh, me too. I can't wait.
And then Hamada coming in. So there's been so much change, actually, and a lot of people are trying to kind of suggest that there hasn't been a lot of change. Yes, there has.
No, there has. Well, and to your point, even
changes.
Yeah, if someone were to come up and go, "Oh, we still have a plan," the question is, whose plan? Right. It's been, at this point, so many people have come and gone. It can't be a consistent plan.
If they say, well, it's a plan that was developed and now we brought in new leadership to oversee it. So the leadership doesn't get to make their own plan? Or
Right.
do they get to, which means the plan is going to change again. It all, there's a lot of stuff going on right now and a lot of moving parts, and some of them are parts I don't think need to be moving, and some of them are parts that feel like they're moving because somebody needs to get in there with some tools and tighten the machinery. So I want to be hopeful, and it's just I kind of have mixed feelings. I'm excited as hell for Wonder Woman 2. I'm excited as hell for Matt Reeves' Batman. I think those are two things that are just going to be amazing. Shazam looks like it's going to be great. Aquaman is I have high hopes for Aquaman because Jason Wan is just such a fantastic filmmaker. B, this is literally before they ever cast Jason Momoa. For 2 or 3 years, I was saying I wanted them to cast Jason Momoa and do an Aquaman who is exactly like what they're doing. And C, I have heard how fully accurate this is. I'm not sure, and I don't know details. A lot of this is vague, but I've heard that a lot of what's going on with Aquaman in this movie is generally consistent with the development plan that came before that was done for him. As far as now, a lot of stuff has changed, and it's Wan's vision for the character, don't get me wrong, but the personality and the tone, my understanding is that the personality and tone is, while not identical, is still similar enough to what came before, which I liked personally, but that there's some, at least a few people have had conversations about whether or not, like, okay, well, if we are moving away from things and Justice League was a bump in the road and we just kind of wanted to hurry, get it done, get it out there and move past it and move on, this Aquaman does still have a lot of roots in what was developed and what, Zack Snyder and what that whole team and what those plans were. So I think that's good. I don't think that's bad news at all, but it makes me wonder about the film's performance, or at least it makes me wonder about the confidence Warner's going to have in promoting it. Ultimately, I think Juan is just so good that I think it's going to be he's going to be so good that the film is going to be successful, and he knows what he's doing, and I think he's probably put together a terrific film. So, but the ones I'm most confident for are Wonder Woman 2, the Batman movies, and Shazam. And then I know a Batgirl's going to come eventually. I know Nightwing is coming eventually. I wonder if they're going to end up getting delayed a bit or not. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about that very soon. So it's just a lot that's up in the air, and I think nobody should make assumptions about what's going to happen because there is so much that's still unsure. And with the AT&T merger, the outcome of that could change everything anyway. So some of this is certain, some of this is more wait and see, some of this is in development, and people are going to keep moving their projects forward until they hear otherwise, but then there's no guarantee they won't hear otherwise.
Right. And you mentioned Batgirl and Nightwing. I mean, those don't even have dates associated with them. So who knows, I mean, if they're waiting to see what Matt Reeves does with Batman to see how it's all going to tie in, and who knows how one affects the other. Well,
I'll tell you this much. I do know, and there are people who say otherwise. I know that Batgirl and Nightwing were on there's a helicopter going over, by the way, right now, so I don't know if you can, hopefully that didn't interfere too much with the noise.
I heard it, but it sounded cool. It sounded like you were in Gotham. It's fine.
It's the Bat plane.
Yes.
I know Batgirl and Nightwing were among the films, and I wrote some articles before those projects were announced where I mentioned them repeatedly to kind of try to make it clear that, hypothetically, these are two films that are probably going to end up being out there. And I know that DC had there were a set number of characters that were on the table that they definitely wanted to develop, and they wanted to figure out how to get them into development sooner rather than later. So, and with Chris McKay on board, I think Chris McKay, I think his Nightwing project is going to happen. The only reason I say that I'm not sure about the time frame on it, I just wonder because of the number of films that may or may not get put into production per year. I know Batgirl I think Batgirl is a planned 2020 kind of time frame. So my guess is that we're going to see Matt Reeves' Batman project start moving forward later this year in pre-production probably, and then enter production sometime in the spring next year maybe, or the earlier, right before summer perhaps.
Okay.
But that's my guess. I doubt that they're going to be able to get it in front of cameras by sometime this year. But they might surprise us all. That script could be further along than anyone knows, and they could just be teasing us about that it's not ready yet. But I think Batman, and then I think Batgirl will go into production possibly next year and for a 2020 time frame. So Nightwing is the one that I'm not sure whether they're gonna. But I think it sounds like there could be some opportunity for that to actually get into production before Batgirl after all. And I love Chris McKay's work, and I think he's fantastic, and I want to see a Nightwing movie really badly. I think it would be a good idea for Warner to put Batgirl, to prioritize Batgirl if it's an either or situation, and they're all
right.
Batman in one other film. I think Batgirl, for a lot of reasons, would be the smart move for them, just from a business sense and politically, so to speak. But we'll see what happens. Either Batgirl or McKay's Nightwing, one of those two will go forward. I'm pretty sure we'll start hearing stuff about that fairly soon.
Yeah, well, and McKay is a little more open about Nightwing. I mean, he won't tell us anything, but he at least responds. So it does feel like there's at least something happening. It seems like there's life there, because otherwise he'd probably say nothing. So that's encouraging. And I also think the fact that with the Titans show, the fact that Dick Grayson is Robin and not Nightwing could be a clue as well, that, because we know how sometimes they have the dumb rules about if it's on TV, it can't be on the movies unless we decide the exception is worthwhile or whatever. So when they released that photo from Titans, which was amazing, by the way, of Brendan Thwaites as Robin, we all were like, we thought for sure Nightwing. But I do wonder if, he's Robin because Nightwing is going to be in the movie. That's...
I'll be blunt. I know some things about the Titans project that I'm not really sure I'm not sure how much or how little we're supposed to say or can say about that. So I spent a little, I don't think it's a secret. I'm pretty sure everybody wrote about it. I spent a little time during Comic-Con went on a boat ride with Jeff Johns and with DC folks, and we had a lot of conversations about stuff, and I know that they're very excited about Titans, and it seems like that show is really shaping up to be a great show. And from what I heard about the influences and what they're doing and the characters that they're using and how they're approaching it, DC fans, it blew my mind, and it blew everybody else's mind that was involved in everybody I know who's heard anything about the project was highly impressed, and there was a whole lot of, oh, really? Holy crap. So it's great. It's going to be great news, and I think fans are really going to love it. And I don't want to say too much more about that, just because, honestly, I'm not sure how much more I can or can't get away with saying.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, no, everything I have seen and heard sounds amazing. And so I'm all in for Titans. I can't wait for it. I did wonder about Batgirl in that I was, I couldn't help but think, did they say Whedon was doing Batgirl just so they could explain why he was hanging around the WB lot for Justice League? Like, I wondered if maybe that was a little bit of sleight of hand. But if you still think that Batgirl's going to happen, that's interesting, just because we've heard nothing about it since then.
Yeah, I think Batgirl's going to happen. I think that there's a question about whether or not Joss Whedon ends up directing that film or is a writer and a producer. But as of right now, he is still, I can say, the last time I checked, I should say, which was not that long ago, I was told just in a very basic way that as of right now, he is still signed on as excuse me, he is still he's still the director on the project. Don't want to say signed on because I don't know the details and specifics of what contractually has been done for that, and what the status is, or if anything's changed for that. But as of the last I heard, which was fairly recently, but wasn't in the last 24 hours, but was fairly recently, was that Whedon is officially, as of now, is writer, director, producer on the project. But my gut feeling is when the time comes, I think he is probably going to say, I've written the script, I'm going to produce the film, maybe a female director should take this on. I think there's a good chance that'll happen. I also think there's a good chance he's going to say, I'm ready to make a DC movie set in the Batman universe. Back up and watch me make a Batgirl movie. But I think, honestly, just to talk plainly, there's been enough allegations and enough information and things put out there, including some quotes from Whedon himself that were revealed, that I think could be problematic if he was helming a Batgirl film. And I think no matter, at the end of the day, it could be difficult for Warner Brothers to keep him as the director and writer and producer on a female superhero movie like that. Just in general, we're at a time when there are so many great female directors out there who could make this movie and who could bring a very different tone and perspective to it, taking the work from someone like Whedon who's written it and then adding and doing a more collaborative approach to it. With a female director, I think would be the smart move, and I think it would be the right move. So, and there's so many other projects out there as well that Joss Whedon could work on. That I think that it's going to happen. I think that the film's going to get made, and I think that we'll probably eventually see a female director named for that. So, for whatever that's worth anyway.
No, that's interesting because I because that project has gone so quiet, I was just not sure if it was ever real to begin with or if it was going to move forward. So I was just, curious to hear your thoughts on that.
If you're gonna right now, I think that there would be. I'm not, and this isn't me saying that I've heard this at all. So I just want to make that clear. This is purely me talking. But if you were wanting to put money on somebody, I think that some smart bets would be maybe Greta Gerwig or Dee Rees in terms of directors that possibly there might be a handoff. The directing duties and then a rewrite by. If you can think of a Joss Whedon superhero script. But it's for a female superhero, so it's being rewritten and directed by Greta Gerwig, who's currently Oscar nominated, the first female director nominated for an Academy Award for directing in 5 years or 6 years. And of course, Ronan was the lead actress in Lady Bird, and she is surely on the short list at this point for possibly playing Batgirl. And then Dee Rees, even though she was criminally not nominated for Best Director, her work on Mudbound was absolutely phenomenal and stunning. And if you see that movie, I don't care who you are, watch Mudbound or watch Lady Bird, and then tell me that you don't want the director of one of those two films to make Batgirl.
Right.
In a collab.
Yeah.
If you love Joss Whedon, then and you're not bothered by or don't think that there's a reason to be, to question the appropriateness of having him direct a female-led superhero movie, especially after the allegations that have been made about him and his undeniable, some of his own comments in messages that's in writing, so it's hard to deny that stuff. So as much as a lot of fans are uncomfortable talking about it, we got to think about that stuff.
Right.
And if they announced the Batgirl project and they had one of those female directors involved in it, I have no doubt whatsoever it would instantly have super level buzz.
Right.
Super level buzz.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. So we talked about, so Nightwing, Batgirl, Shazam, Aquaman, Wonder Woman 2, Batman, and then Suicide Squad 2 allegedly is going to go in front of cameras in the fall.
Yeah, well, that's a thing that, you know what, it's a weird situation because I kind of have I can see it happening, but I'm also kind of like, yeah, but privately, I'm going to just wait and see if that really happens or not.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that a Suicide Squad sequel is really going to get in front of cameras this fall. And it's, we got a long way to go. It's only February, so it could be that happens, but there's
and I honestly, when they mentioned Suicide Squad 2, I thought, oh sure, the same thing. Oh, I'll believe it when I see it. But it's one that doesn't go quiet. Like it seems like they're committed to that one. They signed Gavin O'Connor. The cast continues to talk about it. It seems like that one has a lot of life to it.
Well, I'll say this: do you think they're going to make a Suicide Squad sequel without Harley Quinn or Will Smith?
No,
because Will Smith's schedule is kind of iffy for this, and it sounds like Margot Robbie has another Harley Quinn movie that she is much more interested in making and that she is a producer on. So if you're looking at how the people that, are they going to make this movie if they're not going to have Harley Quinn and if they're not going to have Margot Robbie and Will Smith in it, would you make it without them? And
right. No, of course not.
How confident are we that, and maybe it'll turn out like, ta-da, boom, they're here and they're both going to do the movie. But and Margot Robbie has a lot more, I think, ability to say, no, this is the movie I want to make first. If she wants to make a Harley Quinn solo movie first, I think that they're going to say okay, because she's the Oscar nominee right now. She's Harley Quinn. She's returning. There's no certainty about Will Smith returning for the sequel, as far as my understanding goes right now. There's possibly, it's possible there could be some scheduling stuff that get in the way.
I thought that when the news of the fall shooting date came out, I thought it was specifically because that was when Will Smith had an opening. I swear that when that report came out, that was why. They were like, oh, it'll shoot in the fall because it's when they can get Will Smith.
Well, it could be. It could work out. I'm just not convinced it's going to just yet for that timetable. I know there's a lot of things. I haven't seen any official word from Warner.
Yeah. I think it's all just been
involved, and
crucially,
I have not heard Will Smith or Margot Robbie say anything about that. It's when Margot Robbie talked about it, what has she said specifically is that she's excited for this other project, which is apparently a Bird of Prey. I think a lot of people are saying Gotham City Sirens is dead. They think it's dead, and I don't think it's dead. What my understanding is that it might have morphed into something else, but I don't even hear that it's a certainty that it's fully morphed. We could be looking at more than one Harley Quinn movie. We almost certainly are looking at more than one Harley Quinn movie. It's just a question of what gets made first.
Right.
But Suicide Squad is one of the more profitable of the DCEU movies. Besides Wonder Woman, it's the one that actually, when you weigh everything involved, it overperformed in a lot of ways. Without China, it still performed over in excess of $700 million. Yeah. So despite the bad reviews, audiences liked it okay.
They liked it well enough, yeah.
So
and I also think there's something to be said for it was like the last big offering of that summer. Yeah. So it was able to just keep playing. It didn't really have competition.
Yeah, and it had, people were excited and it had a lot of buzz because the marketing made it look like something that was a little bit different than what it totally was really. But looking at that marketing, now you know what kind of movie to make, don't you? You say, okay, we know what we didn't do. Now we know what we got to do instead. So make that movie instead. I think they know where to go with it, and they have a better roadmap in mind for it now. The question is just when they can get that roadmap enacted. And yeah.
Well, and I think the other question is to the point we were mentioning earlier is, will people give it another go? Or did they like the first one enough to go, well, hopefully the second one will be better, or will be even if the second one is better, will they go, oh, I didn't need another, the way Ninja Turtle sequel cratered last year. Was it last year? In 2016, which it was much better than the first one, but people didn't like the first one, so they didn't bother showing up for the second one.
Yeah.
So I wonder if Suicide Squad might run into that challenge, even if the sequel gets made. Because, of course, looking at the numbers, you go, oh, yeah, of course you make a sequel. Of course you do. Why wouldn't you? But, it's hard to measure if people are willing to give a sequel a chance.
Yeah, and I think that there were obviously some questions about the Joker in that movie. I liked it. I liked Suicide. I really liked the director's extended cut, by the way. So if you haven't seen that, I recommend watching it because it's much better than the theatrical version. I had a lot of complaints about it than I did the theatrical version, but I think that they've changed production. They've changed producers on Suicide Squad 2, and now you've got a new producer who's coming in, and this just happened fairly recently. And it was Mike DeLuca, actually, who is going to come in and had kind of an idea for how to do it and all. But now that's going to be, it's going to end up being a script has got to be rewritten or has to be written. And for that, so that's going to take several months. So that'll take through probably the summer because, right now there's the whole 50 Shades of Grey and, one of those sequels is coming up and Mike DeLuca is involved with that. So how quickly he jumps over to, because besides being a producer, he's writes as well. So he'll be coming in and writing and he'll be coming in and working on and developing a Suicide Squad sequel. Well, how fast is that going to happen? I'm not sure. I don't know if the script's going to be written while he's handling, the 50 Shades of Grey, the new movie that's coming out.
Well, I guess the question is how happy he would be with, because my understanding is Gavin O'Connor's already writing the script.
I think there's going to be rewrites on the script. I think as soon as DeLuca is done with what he's got to do with the new 50 Shades of Grey movie, he will move over and talk and be more hands-on and get more directly involved on shepherding the Suicide Squad sequel. And I think right now they're probably already they're writing and they're in the process of writing the script. And I think it will go through rewrites, and I'm sure DeLuca will come in and have notes and want some additional things done. So how that develops, how fast they can get that finished and how fast the script is done and whether everything's ready and then everyone's, all the actors their schedules are all aligned for the fall. It'd be great if they could do that and pull that together and have it go into production later this year. But I'm not sure. It's one of those things that I'm not sure about. But I feel the way I did, like I felt about Venom. I kept hearing about the Venom project, and I got to the point where I was like, I think that's a hypothetical project. I'll believe it when I see it. I'm not that skeptical on Suicide Squad. I think it is going to happen. I just am not sure that I think it's really going to be able to get into production this year. And I think there's a possibility they might decide that it would make more sense to do it next year to come into it in the spring. But if the schedules align, the fall is a great time to do it because they don't have anything else, I think, starting actually that's going to get in front of cameras this year besides Shazam is filming. And I think I don't believe the Batman will get into production this year. I think it'll end up going ahead and starting next year is my guess.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Shazam's in production right now. Aquaman's in post-production. The most likely candidate to go into production this year other than Shazam might be Suicide Squad. Like maybe that's why they have it slated, is because nothing else would be ready in time. Yeah.
Now, I'll say it's, DC has once before there was a project that I won't mention, but when Ben Affleck wasn't able to direct it, it was partly because maybe there was a little too much. They were going so fast and they wanted the script to be done. They wanted it done. They wanted it done. Literally trying to freaking schedule sound stages and to use for filming a certain movie that I won't mention, but it has Ben Affleck in it, and he was going to direct it. And because
Live by Night 2.
Yeah.
still Living by Night.
Living by Nighter.
Living by Dawn.
So you don't want to. I think, and I hope Warner Brothers knows not to try to push something too aggressively before it's ready and before everybody isn't that. I think everybody that needs to be involved in a Suicide Squad project or any of these projects, they need to make sure all the right people are there and they don't move forward without everybody who can make it as the best it can be, and that they don't push any of those people to be ready before they're ready to be ready.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, that makes sense. Oh, and then the other piece is Flashpoint. Do we think there's life there? I mean, they just the word just came out that they're looking at those vacation / game night guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll be surprised if Flashpoint remains Flashpoint and doesn't. If that's who's going to direct this movie and that project really moves forward, then I would expect it to maybe kind of morph back into a Flash movie again, a solo Flash movie.
I think it should anyway. I mean, as it should be. Yeah. But
this is an example though of so much stuff going back and forth. Roger Zemeckis is interested in doing a Flash movie. I mean, I'll tell you that. I think everybody knows Roger Zemeckis is interested. The question was whether it would fit into his schedule because he has other commitments. But if they're willing to
if Robert Zemeckis wants to make Flash, you wait.
Yeah.
You wait for Robert Zemeckis.
I mean, hypothetically, just purely hypothetically, hell yes, right?
Yeah.
If that's an option, you don't because Flash it's not a project that's going to go into production this year anyway, right? I mean, they're not going to start filming a Flash movie this year. If they did, they'd be crazy because I don't think any project they have is ready or is in shape to be done. They've had so many different people come and go on this project. They've lost 2 directors. They've had a filler director who was just sitting in the chair till they could get somebody else, basically. It's undergone multiple changes for what it was going to be and what it was going to be about. It's the kind of project that I just feel like, look, Flashpoint does seem like it's too soon. It's, you have to earn that. You don't want to go Flashpoint this soon, I don't think. So maybe do a regular Flash movie first, a solo movie, and then down the road, no pun intended, when Roger Zemeckis can come in and do it, then you have, Flash to the future. You make that movie. You make your Flashpoint movie at that then. So.
Right. All right. Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting, but I guess, back to the point I made a while ago is like these all like it doesn't seem like they have plans to reboot, whether you think they should or not. Like you would think that then most of these, especially these really connected ones, like a Flashpoint or like a Suicide Squad 2, like that they would go quiet if they were gonna if they were gonna let the things that were already happening run their course so they could start again. But it doesn't seem like they have the intention of doing that.
No, that's really what I think. It's creating the sense that there's a whole lot of people rearranging chairs and there's a whole lot of people running around. It's very reactionary.
Yeah.
It's reactionary, and it goes back, I guess, to the point that, and this hindsight's 2020, but maybe you shouldn't have gone in front of investors and said, we have this list of 176 movies that we're going to make, and here's release dates, or here's what we're going to do. I like ambition's fine, but come on. First of all, that was just crazy to go in and just saying we want to make properties to develop all of these characters and many more or whatever. There was a way to do that, and then you sit down and you actually plan, and you don't every time each movie that comes out change your plan. But that's what they've been doing, and I have not seen a sign that that's changed yet. Despite everything, and there's changes of leadership and everything else, and there's talk of that they have a plan now. Well, you just changed leadership again. And I don't believe that those people you've brought in and who've, all the movement that's happened, I don't believe that a whole formative new plan has been put together. And I certainly see a lot of evidence. Well, Flash is one example of boom. Well, things seem to be changing again. You're going to bring in writers and who did Spider-Man: Homecoming and who are also directors, and now they're going to take over and they're going to be the directors on the movie. I just have I look at what's going on and I think I want things to calm down first, and I think maybe they just need to sit back and take a breath and say, we're going to stop announcing projects and we're going to stop claiming that we have a plan until we get all of the leadership situation handled, and then get everybody in a damn room together and actually formalize a plan and commit to sticking to it. And I think that's a very reasonable expectation for a business that is dealing in hundreds of millions of dollars to spend of investors' money to make and utilize and develop revenue streams for some of the biggest IP in the world.
Yeah. Hear.
Yeah, I mean, just for example.
Yeah, no, understandable. Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see how things play out. But yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Well, there it is.
I have there's a lot to be positive about. I know I sound like I'm a downer about all this stuff, and I apologize to fans for that, but I love this stuff. I've liked or loved the movies that we've got so far. I've defended the movies we've got so far. I'm disappointed that things weren't allowed to work out better and continue. I'm confident. I'm excited, and I Matt Reeves, when his first Planet of the Apes movie came out, I told him right then, and I said, you need to make Batman movies. So I've been banging that drum and was confident that he was the right guy. I think he's going to do great things and give us a Batman series that is on par with Nolan's series. Mm-hmm. Wonder Woman 2 is going to be spectacular, and maybe this time the Oscars will make the right decision and nominate it. Mm-hmm. I think Shazam looks like it's going to be great. There's a lot to look forward to. But I would be lying if I said I felt confident about the overall state of the future of the DC extended cinematic universe. And I think we still are in a wait-and-see position right now. Too much. No,
I think that makes perfect sense. Yeah. We all know that some of the biggest problems have come from Warner Brothers not being able to get out of their own way in the development and making of these movies. And so we can be excited for the movies themselves, and we can be excited for them on an individual basis. But I think it's, especially after everything that we've seen go down in the past 5 years, or nearly 5 years now, it's only realistic to be a little leery of the leadership and the people pulling the strings, because you're right. After every bump in the road, they move the chairs around the table and go, no, don't worry, we learned until the next time, and then they do it again.
Yeah.
And that's just frustrating for everyone involved, and so, like I've been defending these movies for 4.5 years, but that doesn't mean that you'd have to be kidding yourself to think that everything's in a great spot at this particular moment.
Yeah, and I get, I understand why I understand why fans want to be confident, and there's been so much negative news and so much negative information that sometimes you just feel like, can't just something go right, and can't I just be happy for a day and feel good about things? It's like, there are good things coming, and we just talked about all the great stuff going on at DC Comics right now, and there are still, great people involved in making several great projects, and there is potential for several great more to come. But I do think that I think we have to I think the right answer for fans is to say, look, if you liked the DCEU up until this point, you've got a set of movies. You've got several movies now, 5 movies actually. You've got Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Justice League. You're about to get Aquaman this year. It's just a few months away. You will have 6 movies. You'll have half a dozen movies in an extended DC cinematic universe, including Justice League. So you have a lot to be happy for. I mean, that's if somebody had said, it's just going to be 6 movies. We're going to do a 6-movie miniseries of movies of a connected DC universe. That's all. And then after 6 movies, we'll do something else. But we're going to give you 6 movies. We're going to give you a Superman origin. We're going to give you a Trinity movie with Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman, Batman. We're going to give you a Justice League movie. We're going to give you a Suicide Squad. We got a Suicide Squad movie. Right. Aquaman. What the hell? Are getting an Aquaman. We're getting a lot of movies. Wonder Woman it's huge. So what's happened already? By the end of this year, whatever else the future brings, DC fans who liked what we got, you don't have to be angry or resentful about the future. If you only like some of what we got, you like some of it. You got some good movies. DC has had plenty of great films in the past. Look at the TV universe. I mean, you've got a shared TV universe going on that's really solid and really terrific stuff. Great stuff happening in the comics right now. If you're DC fans, you've got lots of reason to be happy. So whatever does happen in the future, if some things don't work out, you're still going to get Aquaman's still going to come out. Shazam is going to happen. Wonder Woman 2 is going to happen. You're going to get a Batman series from Matt Reeves. You're eventually that Suicide Squad sequel or a Harley Quinn movie is going to come out. And we're going to get a Nightwing movie, and we're going to get a Batgirl movie. Though you've got a half dozen more things coming. So whatever else happens, you can sit back, be happy about the things you've had that you did like. If you didn't like some of it, guess what? There's change coming, and you're going to get more movies. And the ones we do know about are the higher quality, more likely to succeed projects. So take a breath, and meanwhile we can all sit back and say, let's wait and see how this game of musical chairs with leadership happens, and if anything substantive finally settles into place to oversee the rest of these movies.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect place to wrap it up. But I completely agree with you. It's like I feel like I said something similar recently, where it's like no one can take those movies away from you. Those movies exist. They're out there. If you love them, you will have them forever. So most franchises would be thrilled to have 6 movies to their name. And it'll be even more by the time it's done. So even if for some reason that this version of the DC universe does end and we start with a new one, you're going to have 6 or 8 or even 10 movies by the time it's done, which is really respectable for any franchise or any collection of movies. So that's something to be really happy about, and not to mention all the things that we just discussed that are coming our way. Shazam is happening right now as we speak, which is amazing. And how much drama has there been around Shazam?
Yeah. It's
nothing.
It's been a very, very smooth situation, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. We've got a director we feel good about. They just cast it. They just started making it, and we're like, wait, isn't this the way it's supposed to run? So that's pretty awesome too.
Yeah.
So things to look forward to. Still exciting things happening, and then hopefully they'll, the other stuff, they'll work their shit out, because it's time, guys. But anyway, Mark, thank you so much. This went later than I promised, so I feel guilty.
No, that's all right.
It happens.
Happy to be on. Lots of stuff to talk about. I just apologize to your fans for, if you have to chop this up and cut a lot out, then...
Oh, I'm not. Forget it. They like it. It's fine.
Some people, but...
They love it. They can't get enough of it. So, but no, thank you again. It's been a hell of a road through the DC films, but it's not over yet, and we will, we'll just keep seeing it as it comes. I also know there's going to be curveballs coming our way, and it'll be interesting to see what those are. Like things like, whoa, what? They're doing that? It'll be interesting to see what happens. But anyway, if the folks don't already know where to keep up with you, Mark, where can they do that?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at Mark Hughes Films, which where I'm always sharing my articles, talking about comic books, and engaging in way more political rants than I probably should publicly. And you can find me at Forbes, of course, where I'm always. If you can Google Mark Hughes and Forbes, and that's the easiest way to find it because the URL is kind of confusing to say out loud.
Okay. Well, yeah, I just go to Forbes.com, and in the little search, I just put Mark Hughes, and then all your stuff comes up.
There you go.
It's nice and easy. And then you do superhero news with our buddy Sean Gerber.
Over on YouTube, the Superhero News channel with Sean Gerber, and I'm his co-host, and we're always over there doing good stuff, and we've got some really cool stuff coming up, even bigger stuff coming up, hopefully here pretty soon, that we'll be excited to share with everyone.
Awesome. So yeah, folks, keep up with Mark in all those different places, and yeah, support him and Sean over on YouTube. After you watch whatever videos I put up, obviously.
Yeah.
But you've got time for both, because I put up way less videos than they do. They're far more on it than I am. So yeah, check out them. They're great. Yeah, this has been super fun, Mark. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for joining me, and thank you everybody out there for listening and for downloading the show. Please do subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and please leave us an iTunes review. It's quick and it's easy, and it helps support the show. Again, go to holybatcast.com and follow us all over social media on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter, Holy Batcast. But that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. We will see you next time. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Holy Batcast is brought to you by real fans for real movies. Remember, the thoughts and opinions shared by the participants are theirs and theirs alone, and do not represent the companies or organizations they happen to work for.